The aliens were surrounded. The vast blackness of space stretched endlessly around them. Their ships, sleek and silent, floated in formation. Each one gleamed under the light of distant stars. The fleet was powerful, built for speed and destruction. They were the perfect force, capable of conquering entire star systems. But today, something felt different. Commander Zorath, the leader of the alien fleet, stood at the center of the command room. His sharp eyes scanned the holoscreens, his fingers tapping the controls. Every ship in his fleet was positioned perfectly, and yet something made his stomach tighten with unease. He wasn't sure what it was. Perhaps it was the stillness of the battlefield, the silence before the storm. It wasn't normal for a battle to feel this. Empty. He turned to his first officer, Nira, who was standing beside him, her eyes darting between the screens. "Do you feel it too?" he asked. She glanced up at him and nodded. "Yes, Commander. Something is off. I can't explain it." Zorath's gaze returned to the empty space outside. The hunter ships had surrounded them. Dozens of ships, all larger and more advanced than any alien fleet they had ever encountered. These ships were not the usual enemies they faced. The hunter ships were known for their cunning and speed, their ruthless efficiency in battle. But they had never attacked. They just watched, silent, waiting. Then suddenly, a strange, unsettling sound filled the comms. It was not a voice. It was not a warning. It wasn't even a proper signal. It was just a low, rhythmic hum that seemed to echo from every direction at once. At first, Zorath thought it was just static, a malfunction. But it continued, pulsing steadily, growing louder. "What is that sound?" Nira asked, her voice tinged with confusion. Zorath's brow furrowed. He reached for the control panel and quickly scanned the frequencies. The signal didn't match anything in their systems. It wasn't from the hunter ships. It wasn't from any known enemy. The signal seemed human. Impossible, he thought. He had heard stories about Earth, the humans. They were weak, primitive. How could they have sent a signal like this? The entire galaxy had laughed at the idea that humans could ever challenge them. And yet, here it was. He pressed a few buttons, trying to trace the source. The signal wasn't coming from any known ship. It wasn't coming from anywhere in the galaxy they could pinpoint. It was as if the sound was coming from the very air itself. Suddenly, the hum stopped. A new voice crackled through the comms. Calm, steady, almost too calm. "Prepare yourselves," the voice said. Zorath's grip tightened on the armrest of his chair. He didn't recognize the voice, but there was something about it that sent a chill down his spine. It wasn't the words that frightened him. It was the tone. It was confident, unshakable. It was as if the person speaking already knew the outcome of whatever was about to happen. "Who is this?" Zorath demanded, his voice low, commanding. "Identify yourself." There was no answer. The voice didn't respond. Instead, the sound returned, the same low hum. It was almost rhythmic now, like a warning bell. Zorath's heart began to race. He looked around at his officers, their faces filled with confusion and concern. Something was wrong. Something was very wrong. The fleet had been completely surrounded by the hunter ships. Zorath's fleet had no way out, no way to escape. They were sitting ducks in the vastness of space. And yet, the strange sound kept growing louder. Then, without warning, the hunter ships suddenly moved. The sleek, deadly vessels, each one a symbol of the galaxy's most advanced war technology, began to close in on the alien fleet. They moved in a perfect formation, no longer waiting. Zorath felt a cold sweat break out on the back of his neck. "What are they doing?" Nira whispered, more to herself than anyone else. "They're closing in." Zorath didn't answer. He knew the hunter ships were not retreating. They weren't backing down. They were preparing to attack. But there was something else, something more terrifying than the attack itself. The presence of the human signal, the unknown hum, lingered in the air like a cloud of smoke. It was as if Earth, humanity, was waiting to make its move. And that, Zorath realized, was the most frightening part of all. They weren't just surrounded by hunter ships. They were surrounded by something else. For the first time in his career, Zorath felt the sting of uncertainty. There was a force out there, one he couldn't predict, one he couldn't understand. But it was growing, gaining strength, and soon it would reveal itself. "Commander," Nira said, her voice trembling, "we have to make a move." Zorath looked up, his mind racing. He didn't know what to do. His fleet was in perfect formation, but it wouldn't matter if the hunter ships decided to strike all at once. There would be no way to survive that. His ships were powerful, but they were nothing compared to the hunter ships. Even worse, he had no idea who was behind the signal or what kind of force was waiting to reveal itself. And then the answer came. A sudden, sharp, crackling noise filled the comms. The same low hum returned, but now there was something else. A burst of static, followed by the faintest whisper. "This is humanity." Zorath froze. The words hit him like a thunderclap. Humanity. But before he could speak, before he could react, the hunter ships moved in closer. Faster now. The attack was imminent. Zorath had no choice. He issued a command, but deep down he knew. Something was coming. Something humanity had hidden for centuries, and it was about to change everything. The space around them seemed to grow colder. The aliens' fleet sat in perfect formation, waiting. And still, the hum echoed through their communication systems, the unknown voice repeating its chilling message. "This is humanity." Zorath stared at the comms panel, trying to make sense of the words. Humanity. He had dismissed them as a simple, primitive species. But now, that voice, so calm and cold, seemed to mock everything he thought he knew. "Commander," Nira's voice broke through his thoughts. She looked up at him, eyes wide with confusion. "What should we do?" He didn't have an answer. His entire fleet was surrounded by the hunter ships. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. They had always believed that their strength lay in numbers, in overwhelming firepower, but now something was changing. The silence stretched, broken only by that low, rhythmic hum that filled the air. Zorath clenched his fists. The hunter ships were closing in, their sleek, deadly shapes moving with precision, just waiting for a command to strike. Their weapons were already aimed, and the shields around his fleet were weakening with each passing moment. The tension was unbearable. But then, just as he was about to issue orders to prepare for the worst, the comms crackled again. This time, it wasn't the eerie hum or the voice of humanity. It was something else. A loud, deafening sound, like the roar of a machine coming to life. It echoed through the space around them, rattling Zorath's bones. "What is that?" Nira gasped. Zorath's eyes narrowed. He had never heard anything like it. It was a deep mechanical growl, followed by the whine of engines pushing to full power. And then the unmistakable sound of something massive breaking through space itself. Before anyone could react, the hunter ships around them began to slow. One by one, they stopped, hovering in place, their weapons no longer aimed at the alien fleet. A stunned silence filled the space. Zorath watched in disbelief as the enemy fleet, once so confident, seemed to pause, afraid. "What's happening?" Zorath demanded, his heart racing. "Why have they stopped?" Nira checked the readouts, her face growing paler by the second. They're not responding to our commands. Their ships are malfunctioning. The systems are failing." Zorath's mind spun. The hunter ships were known for their incredible technology, far beyond anything his people could dream of. Yet, here they were, stunned and silent. Something was interfering with their systems. And then, it happened. A massive shape appeared out of nowhere, cutting through the blackness of space. It was not like anything Zorath had ever seen before. It wasn't a ship, not in the way he understood ships. It was something else. The shape was enormous, covered in dark, swirling patterns, like the void itself had come to life. It was a monstrous, ancient thing, and as it approached, the hunter ships seemed to shrink back in fear, their systems still failing. Zorath couldn't breathe. "What is that thing?" Naira's voice trembled. I don't know. But it's not a ship. It's something alive." The enormous creature, if it could be called that, seemed to move through space with an unnatural grace. It didn't appear to be using engines, no visible thrusters or propulsion systems. It simply was. Zorath was frozen, his mind racing. This wasn't just any ship, and it certainly wasn't human technology. He had never seen anything that could move like this, let alone create such a disturbance in the hunter ship's systems. The creature moved closer, and with it, the hum returned. The same low, rhythmic pulse, now more powerful, vibrating through the very core of space. Zorath could feel it in his chest. This wasn't just a signal, it was a presence. Something ancient, something vast. And then, a voice, louder than before, echoed through the comms once again. "Humanity has arrived." Zorath's eyes widened in shock. The voice was clearer now, more powerful. "Humanity," he whispered. "But how? What is this?" The alien fleet was on the verge of panic. They had been ready to fight the hunter ships, to hold their ground in a battle they had no chance of winning. But now, something far more terrifying was standing before them. The enormous shape moved closer, its mass blocking out the stars behind it. Zorath couldn't make out any details, just the overwhelming sense of power and presence that radiated from the creature. It was a dark, looming mass, but there was something strangely beautiful about it too. It felt ancient. It felt like it had been there long before the aliens, long before the hunter ships, and perhaps even before the galaxy itself. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the creature stopped. Zorath's heart raced in his chest. The hunter ships were still frozen in place, their weapons now dormant, their systems crippled. The alien fleet, too, was caught in the grip of confusion and fear. But then, another voice came through the comms. It was the same calm, collected tone as before. "Do not mistake our silence for weakness," the voice said, this time stronger, more commanding. "We are not here to negotiate. We are here to reclaim what is ours." Zorath's mind reeled. What was this? Who were these humans? And why did they have such power? But before he could form another thought, the hum grew louder, filling every corner of space, every piece of metal. It wasn't just a signal anymore. It was a force. And now Zorath knew that they were no longer fighting for survival. They were fighting for their very place in the galaxy. The space around them seemed to grow colder. The aliens' fleet sat in perfect formation, waiting. And still, the hum echoed through their communication systems, the unknown voice repeating its chilling message. "This is humanity." Zorath stared at the comms panel, trying to make sense of the words. Humanity. He had dismissed them as a simple, primitive species. But now, that voice, so calm and cold, seemed to mock everything he thought he knew. "Commander," Nura's voice broke through his thoughts. She looked up at him, eyes wide with confusion. "What should we do?" He didn't have an answer. His entire fleet was surrounded by the hunter ships. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. They had always believed that their strength lay in numbers, in overwhelming firepower, but now something was changing. The silence stretched, broken only by that low, rhythmic hum that filled the air. Zorath clenched his fists. The hunter ships were closing in, their sleek, deadly shapes moving with precision, just waiting for a command to strike. Their weapons were already aimed, and the shields around his fleet were weakening with each passing moment. The tension was unbearable. But then, just as he was about to issue orders to prepare for the worst, the comms crackled again. This time, it wasn't the eerie hum or the voice of humanity. It was something else. A loud, deafening sound, like the roar of a machine coming to life. It echoed through the space around them, rattling Zorath's bones. "What is that?" Nira gasped. Zorath's eyes narrowed. He had never heard anything like it. It was a deep mechanical growl, followed by the whine of engines pushing to full power. And then, the unmistakable sound of something massive breaking through space itself. Before anyone could react, the hunter ships around them began to slow. One by one, they stopped, hovering in place, their weapons no longer aimed at the alien fleet. A stunned silence filled the space. Zorath watched in disbelief as the enemy fleet, once so confident, seemed to pause, afraid. "What's happening?" Zorath demanded, his heart racing. "Why have they stopped?" Nira checked the readouts, her face growing paler by the second. They're not responding to our commands. Their ships are malfunctioning. The systems are failing." Zorath's mind spun. The hunter ships were known for their incredible technology, far beyond anything his people could dream of. Yet, here they were, stunned and silent. Something was interfering with their systems. And then, it happened. A massive shape appeared out of nowhere, cutting through the blackness of space. It was not like anything Zorath had ever seen before. It wasn't a ship, not in the way he understood ships. It was something else. The shape was enormous, covered in dark, swirling patterns, like the void itself had come to life. It was a monstrous, ancient thing, and as it approached, the hunter ships seemed to shrink back in fear, their systems still failing. Zorath couldn't breathe. "What is that thing?" Nira's voice trembled. I don't know. But it's not a ship. It's something alive." The enormous creature, if it could be called that, seemed to move through space with an unnatural grace. It didn't appear to be using engines, no visible thrusters or propulsion systems. It simply was. Zorath was frozen, his mind racing. This wasn't just any ship, and it certainly wasn't human technology. He had never seen anything that could move like this, let alone create such a disturbance in the hunter ship's systems. The creature moved closer, and with it, the hum returned. The same low, rhythmic pulse, now more powerful, vibrating through the very core of space. Zorath could feel it in his chest. This wasn't just a signal, it was a presence. Something ancient, something vast. And then, a voice, louder than before, echoed through the comms once again. "Humanity has arrived." Zorath's eyes widened in shock. The voice was clearer now, more powerful. "Humanity?" he whispered. "But how? What is this?" The alien fleet was on the verge of panic. They had been ready to fight the hunter ships, to hold their ground in a battle they had no chance of winning. But now something far more terrifying was standing before them. The enormous shape moved closer, its mass blocking out the stars behind it. Zorath couldn't make out any details, just the overwhelming sense of power and presence that radiated from the creature. It was a dark, looming mass, but there was something strangely beautiful about it too. It felt ancient. It felt like it had been there long before the aliens, long before the hunter ships, and perhaps even before the galaxy itself. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the creature stopped. Zorath's heart raced in his chest. The hunter ships were still frozen in place, their weapons now dormant, their systems crippled. The alien fleet, too, was caught in the grip of confusion and fear. But then, another voice came through the comms. It was the same calm, collected tone as before. "Do not mistake our silence for weakness," the voice said, this time stronger, more commanding. "We are not here to negotiate. We are here to reclaim what is ours." Zorath's mind reeled. What was this? Who were these humans, and why did they have such power? But before he could form another thought, the hum grew louder, filling every corner of space, every piece of metal. It wasn't just a signal anymore. It was a force. And now, Zorath knew that they were no longer fighting for survival. They were fighting for their very place in the galaxy. The tension in space was unbearable. Zorath's mind raced as he tried to make sense of what was unfolding before him. The massive, mysterious entity that had appeared. Whatever it was, now loomed before the alien fleet like an unstoppable force. The hunter ships, once so powerful, were now silent and immobilized. And yet, the voice that had spoken through the comms echoed in his mind, shaking him to his core. We are here to reclaim what is ours. But what did that mean? Zorath felt a chill run down his spine. The human envoy had been executed, and yet humanity's vengeance had arrived in the most unimaginable way. The question now wasn't if they would fight, but how they would fight. Commander, Mira's voice was filled with a sense of urgency. We can't just sit here. We need to act, or we'll be destroyed. Zorath glanced at her, but there was little he could say. The alien fleet was surrounded, and the once mighty hunter ships were helpless in the face of the enormous dark entity that now blocked out the stars. Every fiber of his being screamed for action, but in the face of such an overwhelming force, what could they do? We have no choice, Zorath muttered, turning back to the view of the massive creature. We must fight, but we need a plan. Suddenly, a flash of light cut through the void. It wasn't just one burst, it was a continuous wave, shooting outward in all directions, like a pulse rippling through space. Zorath's heart skipped a beat. He knew what that was. The creature, the presence they had all felt, had unleashed something. A weapon. But it wasn't a weapon in the traditional sense. It wasn't fire or explosions. It was something else. The light passed through the hunter ships like they were nothing. They seemed to shimmer for a brief moment before disappearing completely. Gone. Not destroyed, but erased, as if they had never existed. Zorath's eyes widened in disbelief. They've. Before he could finish his sentence, the pulse hit the alien fleet. Zorath's own ships rocked as the pulse washed over them, and he felt a strange, cold sensation deep in his chest. The systems flickered, and for a moment, it seemed as though the entire fleet had gone dark. But then, as quickly as it had come, the pulse faded. The silence that followed was deafening. Zorath stared at the control panel, waiting for any sign of life. It was a moment that felt like an eternity, but then something unexpected happened. A voice. Humanity's voice. The galaxy is about to learn what happens when you cross Earth. The stars tremble at our return. Zorath's stomach twisted. Those words were clear. They were not an idle threat. Humanity was not just defending themselves. They were declaring war. And they were doing it in the most terrifying way imaginable. Commander, Nira shouted, her voice filled with panic. The fleet is. They're alive. The ship's air. She trailed off, her eyes wide with horror. Zorath turned to look at the viewports, and his breath caught in his throat. The space around them was changing. The stars, once cold and distant, now seemed to flicker in strange, unnatural patterns. A new presence, something even darker than before, was moving into the area, surrounding them. It wasn't just the human entity anymore. There were more of those massive ships, identical to the one that had appeared earlier. They weren't just ships. They were living things, massive and full of dark energy, pulsing with a power that Zorath could not comprehend. One of the ships moved closer, its surface shimmering like liquid metal. As it approached, it revealed something even more unimaginable. A massive form, made of pure dark matter, hovered just outside the ship. It was like a living shadow, stretching and shifting, its edges cracking with energy. Zorath could only stare in disbelief as the dark matter shifted, revealing what was beneath it. The figure was humanoid but massive, standing taller than anything Zorath had ever seen. It radiated power, energy, and an undeniable sense of ancient purpose. The figure looked down at him, and for a moment, Zorath thought it was staring directly into his soul. Then the voice came again. You are not the first to stand in our way, alien. You will not be the last. The word sent a chill through Zorath's spine. It was the same calm, almost disinterested tone as before, but now it carried an edge of warning. Humanity was no longer negotiating. They were taking control. They were here to make sure the galaxy understood that they would never be pushed aside again. The alien fleet was in chaos. Some ships were still reeling from the pulse, their systems still down. Others had begun to panic, their commanders shouting orders that went unanswered. Zorath's own fleet was no better. There was no unity, no order. The alien forces were crumbling under the pressure of an enemy they could not understand or fight. "Commander, Nera's voice trembled. We can't hold out much longer. What do we do?" Zorath's heart pounded in his chest. The once untouchable alien fleet was now nothing more than a ragtag collection of broken ships, and the hunter ships that had once been their only hope were now lost to the dark forces of humanity's vengeance. Zorath knew there was only one thing they could do. "Prepare for battle," he ordered, though his voice was shaky. "We fight, or we die." And as he spoke those words, the massive humanoid figure in the dark matter ship raised its hand. It wasn't a gesture of peace. It was a signal. The next strike would come, and the galaxy would know that humanity had arrived. And it would never be the same again. The air in the command center of the alien fleet felt thick with tension. Zorath's hand shook slightly as he grasped the armrest of his chair. His eyes darted between the holographic displays, watching in disbelief as the human ships, now more numerous, moved in a slow, deliberate circle around the fleet. The sense of inevitability, of impending doom, weighed heavily on him. Each passing moment felt like the countdown to the end. Nera's voice was barely a whisper, but it cut through the silence like a blade. "Commander, they're not just attacking us. They're making sure we know exactly who they are." Zorath turned to face her, his face grim. "Yes, this isn't just war. It's an annihilation." The dark matter ships, the ones that had first emerged from the blackness, moved gracefully and slowly, as though they were studying the alien fleet from every angle. Zorath knew this was no ordinary enemy. These humans, whatever they had become, were calculating. Their ships, like dark gods of destruction, took their time, savoring the fear they had instilled in their foes. A new voice echoed from the communication network, a voice Zorath recognized, but had never expected to hear again. "Zorath," it said, cold and unyielding. "I hope you're enjoying the show." Zorath's stomach twisted. It was the human envoy, the one they had executed, the one whose death had sparked everything. The voice wasn't his, though. It was distorted, alien, almost otherworldly, and Zorath could feel it through the very walls of his ship. He glanced at Nera, who looked as shaken as he felt. "What is this?" she demanded. "How is this even possible?" Zorath didn't have the answer. He didn't understand how they had returned, but it was clear now. The envoy's death had only been the beginning. Humanity wasn't just fighting for revenge. They were fighting to make a statement, to make the galaxy understand that no one, no matter how advanced, could stand against them. "We should have never underestimated them," Zorath murmured, his voice heavy with regret. "We thought they were weak. Now they show us what true power is." As the voice continued to speak, Zorath felt the fear creep into his bones. "Do you see it now, Zorath? The vastness of your defeat. You were always just a pawn in the game, but now you face the players." The words echoed in Zorath's mind as the dark matter ships surged forward, a fleet of destructive beauty, and their overwhelming power was undeniable. A massive glowing pulse of dark energy shot from one of the human ships, enveloping several of the alien warships in its grasp. The ships trembled violently under the force of the pulse, their shields flickering, but the energy didn't stop. It tore through the ships as though they were paper. In an instant, several of the alien vessels were reduced to nothing but debris. A scream of pure terror rang out across the fleet. Zorath's heart sank as he realized the destruction had only just begun. The hunter ships, their once proud fleet, was crumbling in the face of humanity's onslaught. They hadn't even fought back yet. Zorath gritted his teeth. They won't just destroy us. They want us to feel it. The voice, which was still haunting Zorath's comms, continued with its chilling message. How does it feel, Zorath? To watch as everything you know falls apart. The power you once had, the alliances you thought were unbreakable. It's all nothing now. You will watch, and you will learn. Zorath tried to hold on to his composure, but the fear was becoming too much. He had never felt this small, this powerless. For the first time in his life, he felt like a mere insect before something far greater. Suddenly, the alien fleet jolted. A ship, a massive battleship that had been previously stationed near the back of the formation, erupted in a spectacular explosion. The explosion was so bright, it lit up the entire surrounding space, a flash of blinding white against the vast darkness of space. The shockwave rippled outward, disturbing even the massive human ships that hovered near the edges of the battlefield. Zorath's eyes widened in horror. The force of the blast sent several other alien vessels tumbling into space, their engines dying, their systems crushed by the unrelenting force. Their once formidable fleet was now just a collection of lost ships, aimlessly drifting as their numbers dwindled one by one. Retreat. Zorath barked, his voice filled with desperation. Get out of here. Now. It was too late. The alien fleet had already begun to fracture under the human assault. Ships that had once held the balance of power in the galaxy were now little more than targets in a game of cat and mouse. Nara looked at Zorath, her face pale and stricken with fear. Commander, what do we do? There's no way out. They've surrounded us. Zorath didn't know how to respond. He wanted to fight, to push back, to resist, but there was no fight left in them. They had been outmatched, outclassed. Humanity had become something unimaginable, something beyond anything Zorath could comprehend. In the distance, the dark matter ships began to glow with energy again, their weapons charging for the next strike. Zorath knew that even if they tried to flee, it would be in vain. There was nowhere to go. They had no allies left. Humanity had surrounded them completely. Get the survivors to the escape pods, Zorath finally said, his voice breaking. We're done. He turned away from the command deck, his mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. Fear, regret, and beneath it all, a sliver of awe. Humanity's fury had arrived, and now the galaxy would feel it. As the last of the alien fleet crumbled, the dark ships moved in to finish their task. It was the end of an era, the fall of an empire. The galaxy would never be the same again. Zorath couldn't remember the last time he'd felt so small. The once proud fleet of the aliens, an empire that had ruled vast stretches of the galaxy, was now little more than broken wreckage floating in the emptiness of space. The remaining few ships, those that had managed to escape the initial onslaught, were now scrambling in every direction, desperate to flee. But there was no escape. The human ships surrounded them, blocking every route, every avenue of retreat. The galaxy itself seemed to hold its breath as the alien ships drifted, shattered, in the cold void. Zorath stood on the bridge of the flagship, staring out into the chaos. His eyes were wide, filled with disbelief, as he watched another of his fleet's ships disintegrate under the unrelenting fire of the human vessels. The very air around him felt heavier with each passing second. We can't outrun them, Nara whispered, her voice trembling. She stood beside him, her gaze fixed on the chaos outside. No, Zorath muttered, his mind struggling to process what was happening. We can't. The humans, with their dark matter ships, had turned the tables completely. The once mighty alien fleets had been hunted down, one by one, their shields shattered, their engines fried. And now, Zorath and his surviving crew were the hunted. Suddenly, a new voice crackled over the comms, sending a chill down Zorath's spine. It was calm, almost cold, yet every word dripped with deadly intent. You're in our way, the voice said, and we don't tolerate obstacles. Zorath's breath caught in his throat as he recognized the voice. It was the human envoy, the one who had been executed. But this time, it wasn't the envoy. The message was coming from the heart of the human fleet, and the tone was unmistakable. The humans weren't just here for revenge. They were here to make a statement that no one in the galaxy would ever forget. Zorath's hands clenched into fists. "What do they want?" he hissed. "We've been defeated. What more could they want from us?" Nara's eyes narrowed. "It's not over. Not yet." Zorath turned to her. "What do you mean?" "They're not just destroying us. They're sending a message," Nara said, her voice low but filled with urgency. "They want the galaxy to know that humanity is not to be messed with. That every single life, every empire that dares to stand against them, will feel their wrath." Zorath swallowed hard. "I don't understand," he muttered. "How could we have misjudged them so badly?" The answer came in the form of another barrage from the human fleet. The blast was so powerful that it shook the very hull of Zorath's flagship. The alien ship's shields flickered and sputtered before collapsing entirely. The crew on the bridge lurched forward as the ship groaned under the strain. But the destruction didn't stop. It wasn't just the ships that were being destroyed. It was the idea of the alien superiority, their place in the galaxy, that was being shattered. Zorath staggered back, his eyes wide. "We never stood a chance." Nara stepped forward, her expression hard. "No, we didn't." The human ships, glowing with dark energy, moved with a calculated grace, their weapons firing in rapid succession, reducing alien ships to glowing embers. Each explosion was a thunderous declaration of power. Zorath's mind raced. There was only one option left: surrender. But he didn't know if the humans would even accept that. After everything that had happened, after the death of the envoy, he couldn't imagine them showing any mercy. As if reading his mind, the voice crackled back over the comms. "You were warned. Your arrogance, your cruelty, your mistakes, all of them brought you here. Now, the galaxy will remember what happens when you stand against humanity." Zorath's heart sank. It was clear now. The humans weren't going to stop until they had eradicated the very idea of the alien empire. They were going to make sure that no one in the galaxy would ever challenge them again. The galaxy was their stage, and they were the unstoppable force. He stood frozen as the voice continued. "There's no room left for empires like yours. This is the end of your rule. This is the beginning of the age of humanity." Zorath turned to his crew, his face grim. "Prepare to abandon ship," he said, his voice hollow. "We've lost." The command center fell silent as the realization set in. The galaxy they once knew was gone, and as the last of their fleet was engulfed by the dark matter blasts, Zorath felt a strange mix of fear and awe. Humanity, in their fury, had turned the tides. They had crushed an empire, and the entire galaxy would now feel their power. As the alien flagship was destroyed in the final moments, Zorath found himself drifting in the void, watching helplessly as the remaining alien forces fled. It was over. Earth had claimed its vengeance, but there was no time to mourn. The stars would remember this day. Zorath floated in the cold silence of space, watching as the last of the alien ships flood into the darkness. The final remnants of their once proud empire were shattered, their glory and arrogance reduced to mere dust. The stars, once a symbol of their dominance, now felt cold and indifferent. The remnants of the galaxy's great civilizations were being rewritten by the unstoppable force that was humanity. As Zorath stared into the void, his thoughts were a jumbled mess. Was this the end for his people? Would they be remembered only for their failure to recognize the danger that humanity posed? And what about the galaxy? The balance had been forever shifted. No one could deny the power of Earth anymore. Is this the end? Nira's voice broke through his reverie. She stood beside him, her eyes wide with disbelief as they watched their world crumble. Zorath sighed, his gaze lingering on the distant stars. "I don't know," he admitted, "but it doesn't look like there's any way back." In the distance, a massive human warship loomed, its black hull gleaming in the cold light of distant suns. It moved with terrifying precision, as though every movement was calculated. Behind it, countless smaller ships followed in formation, a sea of dark metal that swallowed the stars. The voice from the human fleet came over the comms again, calm as always, but now it carried a weight that was impossible to ignore. "You've learned what happens when you push humanity too far," the voice said. "Now you will learn what happens when we decide to reshape the galaxy." Zoreth's heart pounded. They were not finished. Humanity had not only destroyed them, but was now setting its sights on the very foundation of the galaxy itself. If the human fleet continued on this path, nothing would stand in their way. Nera looked at him with fear in her eyes. "What does that mean? Are they going to destroy everyone?" Zoreth didn't answer immediately. The truth was too painful to face. Humanity's rage had set the galaxy on fire, and soon nothing would remain untouched. The once powerful empires of the galaxy were now mere stepping stones to Earth's ascension. The human ships were not just here for revenge. They were here to dominate, to create a new order, one where humanity would stand at the top. "Earth is not just fighting for revenge," Zoreth finally said. "They're making sure that no one ever forgets their power. They're turning the stars into their kingdom." The word hung heavy in the air, and for a moment, the only sound was the hum of the ship's systems. Nera stood in silence, her face pale. She understood now. The humans were not satisfied with just taking revenge on them. They were going to change everything. Back on the human flagship, Commander Draven stood in his command center, gazing at the galaxy before him. His face was calm, but inside, he was seething with the fire of vengeance. His people had been mocked, ridiculed, and belittled for far too long. Now, they would be the ones to rewrite the rules. "We've shown them the cost of defying humanity," Draven said to his officers. "But this is just the beginning. The galaxy will see the truth. Humanity does not forgive. Humanity does not forget." He turned to the holographic map of the galaxy before him. The alien fleets had been wiped out, their strongholds reduced to ashes. There were still pockets of resistance, other empires who had watched the destruction of the alien forces from afar, but they would be dealt with in time. Earth had shown that they were not just a power to be reckoned with. They were a force that could not be stopped. "We'll let them watch," Draven continued, his voice filled with cold determination. "Let the other empires tremble. The age of humanity is beginning, and no one will stand in our way." As his words echoed through the command center, the human fleet began to move. A new path was being carved through the galaxy, and no one could predict where it would lead. The stars were not just a place to navigate anymore. They were now the canvas upon which humanity would paint its mark. Back on Zoreth's ship, the crew was in chaos. The realization that their empire was falling apart, that their entire way of life had been destroyed by a race they once considered insignificant, was too much to bear. There was no escape, no refuge. Humanity's fury had already claimed everything. They were now witnesses to a new era. Zoreth closed his eyes, trying to block out the sound of the comms as another warning flashed across the screen. "Warning. Incoming transmission from Earth Fleet." He knew what was coming. They had already sent their message. They had already made it clear that there would be no mercy. But even as he prepared for the worst, Zoreth felt a cold weight settle in his chest. The galaxy that once seemed so vast, so full of possibilities, was now a place where only one power reigned supreme. The voice from Earth echoed once again, this time with a finality that was impossible to ignore. "To all remaining factions in the galaxy, surrender now or face the same fate as those who dared to challenge humanity. Your time has passed. This is the beginning of a new order." Zoreth's hands gripped the controls. He had no response. There was no way to fight back, no way to stop the human juggernaut that had already begun its march across the stars. Humanity had shown no mercy, and now they would rule the galaxy. The stars were not as bright as they once were. The shimmer of distant galaxies, once symbols of hope and freedom for so many, now felt distant, almost unreachable. Earth's ships continued their relentless march through the galaxy, leaving nothing untouched in their wake. No one dared challenge them. The empires of the galaxy, once proud and mighty, had been reduced to mere dust. Zorath stood on the command deck of his ship, his once strong demeanor now shattered. His eyes were locked on the massive human warships that moved like shadows across the stars. They were everywhere now. There was no escape. "We have no choice," Mira said softly, standing beside him. Her voice trembled, her face pale from the terror of the unknown future. "They've destroyed everything we've known. Earth is unstoppable." Zorath's fists clenched. The defeat weighed heavily on his mind. But he had known from the start that this day was inevitable. He had seen the rise of humanity, had watched them grow stronger and bolder with each passing year. They had learned, adapted, and become a force none could reckon with. And now, they were on the verge of reshaping the entire galaxy. Humanity had taken revenge on the alien envoys, but it was clear now that revenge had only been the beginning. The Earth was not just angry. They were determined to claim their place at the top of the galaxy, and they would let nothing stop them. The voice of Commander Draven crackled through the comm system, cutting through the silence like a blade. His words were cold, calculated, and final. "Your time is over," Draven said. "We've shown mercy where none was deserved. Now we take what's ours." Zorath's heart sank. The humans had not only destroyed their enemies, they were now claiming the galaxy for themselves. The alien factions who had once ruled with pride and arrogance were now facing their final moments. Earth's ships didn't just represent power, they symbolized humanity's unyielding will to dominate. "I never thought it would end like this," Zorath said, his voice barely a whisper. "We underestimated them. All of us did." Nira nodded. They've been patient, waiting for their moment. Now, they're making sure no one ever forgets the price of defying them. The humans were not just after vengeance anymore. They were making sure the galaxy would never forget their wrath. And no one was left to stop them. No alien alliance, no army of ships could stand in their way. Humanity was now a juggernaut, a force that would shake the galaxy to its very core. Far from the front lines, in the heart of the galaxy, the remaining alien leaders met in secret. Their once proud councils now felt like whispers in the wind. They were broken, powerless, and at a loss for how to face the looming threat. "What do we do now?" one of them asked, his voice laced with fear. Another leader spoke, their voice trembling. "The humans are everywhere. They've crushed everything. Their ships, they move like shadows. How do we stop that?" No one had an answer. They had hoped their might, their fleets, and their alliances would protect them from such a force. But they had miscalculated. They had underestimated the human spirit. Back on the human flagship, Commander Draven stood at the front of the command center, his face illuminated by the cold light of the galaxy. He gazed at the holographic map of their conquests. Each alien world, each once proud star system now under their control. His eyes burned with a quiet intensity. "We've shown the galaxy what happens when you stand against us. No one will ever question humanity's place in the stars again." A sharp voice interrupted his thoughts. "Sir, we've just received intel from a remaining alien stronghold. They're planning a last stand. We expect heavy resistance." Draven turned slowly, his eyes gleaming with a mix of determination and cold resolve. "Resistance? There is no resistance. There is only the inevitable conclusion. It's time we show the galaxy that no one, not even those who thought they were untouchable, can stand against us." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "The final phase begins. We take everything." The order was given, and the human fleet shifted, moving toward the heart of the remaining alien resistance. The battle would be swift, overwhelming. The aliens had no chance. Humanity's fleet, larger and stronger than anything they could have imagined, moved forward like an unstoppable wave. Zorath, staring at the approaching doom, felt a strange sense of surrender. His people had tried to fight back, but they had failed. The humans had not only defeated them, they had shown the galaxy that their dominance was eternal. As Zorath looked to the stars one last time, he could not help but feel a sense of awe, mixed with fear. Humanity had become something greater than anyone had ever imagined. They were no longer just survivors of a brutal war. They had become the rulers of the stars, and the galaxy was now theirs.